You wake up in a wooden-framed house with the wind whispering through the seams. The rooster crows late today, and you can already feel the weight of the air, not heat, not storm, but something quieter, dampness, a kind of hush. You glance out the window and see it. Pale gray, no thunder, no lightning, just a soft, soaking rain starting to patter against the window glass. It's Sunday, and in early 1800s rural America, that's not just a minor inconvenience, it's a message. Maybe a warning, maybe a judgment, maybe. You did something wrong this week. Your boots sit by the door, dry and dusty, but you're not putting them on. No field work today, not even a glance at the furrows behind the barn. You lower your eyes, not in shame, but in deference. Somewhere in the back of your mind is a voice not quite your preacher's, but close whispering that God sends signs to those who forget the Sabbath. And rain on a Sunday, that's no coincidence. That's scripture come home to roost. You probably won't survive this. Okay, maybe you will, but your turnips might not. And worse, your reputation, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you grew up in a place where Sunday weather felt like a sermon, or you have elders who still side-eye clouds at 9 a.m., I want to hear about it in the comments. I hope that through my sharing, you will gain a clearer understanding of your own situation or that of your loved ones, along with ways to overcome the challenges you may be facing. I wish you success, happiness, and peace. Now, back to the porch. You step outside with a tin cup of something warm. Coffee? Maybe. Chicory? It's not important. What matters is that your neighbors might be watching, not you. Exactly, but your barn. Your hands, your feet, whether you dare walk to the tool shed today. Rain on a Sunday wasn't always an omen. You know, but in the Puritan-soaked soil of early America, patterns and punishments got tangled fast. The farmers weren't just tillers of land, they were readers of signs. And the sky was their daily scripture. A storm on Tuesday, just nature. A storm on Sunday. That's consequence. Mainstream historical records show that many early settlers, especially in the Northeast, viewed natural events through a moral lens. Drought meant sin, flooding meant corruption, and gentle rain on a Sabbath, that was God weeping for the workers who didn't stop, or testing the ones who almost didn't. One fringe belief held by a Pennsylvania preacher around 1820 claimed that when the rain falls upon the resting, it blesses. But when it falls upon the working, it judges. His little congregation didn't farm on Sundays, ever, even in famine. Even when the corn whispered now or never. Historians still argue whether farmers truly believed this or simply feared the communal consequences of appearing unholy. Either way, the rain carried weight, and it wasn't just about fear. It was about rhythm. Sunday was the one day that didn't revolve around the plow, the wheel, or the weather. You rose, you prayed, you listened, and if you heard rain during the hymns, you felt something stir in your chest. Was it guilt? Was it awe? Was it just the knowledge that seed planted tomorrow might not take root if today was wrong? One early Missouri farmer wrote in his journal, "Rain on the Lord's day is the Lord's breath, saying hush." That same man was known to leave full sacks of grain in the field on Saturday night and not touch them until Monday at dawn. Even if wind was rising, you picture it right, dozens of farms. Rows left half planted, and every eye turned upward at the first drop. Not one hand reaching for the hoe, not one wheel turning. And there were jokes about it, too. You know, the sleepy kind of front porch jokes that stretch longer than a line of laundry. He who hoes on Sunday finds his cabbages drowned by Monday, or the sharper ones. She boiled beans on the Sabbath and burned the barn in August. They weren't just funny, they were warnings, coded reminders passed down like sourdough starters and hymnals. But of course, not everyone agreed. There were the quiet rebels. The ones who whispered to their kids, "Let's just pick a few weeds while no one's looking." The ones who swore they heard the rain coming early because someone down the road didn't honor the day. Suspicion and superstition walked hand in hand down the chapel aisle, and even the devout had their practical limits. Because when crops rot or animals fall ill, you start asking, does rain care about righteousness still for many? The fear wasn't just of consequences, it was of being seen breaking the pattern. The rhythm, the unspoken covenant between soil, sky, and soul. And so, the rain became holy, or heavy, or sometimes both. You sip again from your cup. You're still standing there, still wondering whether the barn roof will leak, still listening for a crack of thunder that might confirm your suspicions, but what's louder is memory. The kind passed down through calloused hands and church whispers. Rain on a Sunday. You don't run from it. You don't work through it. You sit. You listen. Because maybe it's just weather, or maybe it's the sound of something bigger telling you to wait. You remember the arguments, don't you? Not the loud kind, no, just murmurs in the smokehouse, over fence rails, between sips of cooled coffee. The kind of debates that stretched for decades without ever being settled. Should we till the land on Sunday if a storm's coming Monday? Should we let the cows go unmilked just to protect the rhythm of the Sabbath? Or worse, should we dig seed trenches on the Lord's Day if rain is already falling and the fields are thirsty? Welcome to the Sabbath soil debate. You shuffle out to the edge of the field in your mind, boots and ankle-high weeds, the hoe resting on your shoulder. The clouds roll in slow but sure, and you've got half a mind to finish what you started. But you stop because out here, the soil isn't just dirt. It's testimony. In early American farming communities, the land was considered not just property but covenant. You tended it, you prayed over it, and you rested it. Especially on Sundays, and if you didn't, well, you invited rain or worse, unseasonal rain in places and moments it wasn't meant to fall. One historical account from rural Connecticut tells of a farmer whose crops failed 3 seasons in a row. His neighbors whispered it was because he let the mule step in furrows past church bells. He didn't plow on Sunday every time, but once was enough to draw suspicion and rain. Mainstream records back this up. Puritan colonies often wrote Sabbath restrictions into town ordinances. Not just no taverns open, but no labor of hand or beast upon the field under penalty of fine and divine censure. Rain wasn't just weather, it was enforcement. Historians still argue whether the fear of rain was more about shame or actual belief, writes one scholar of frontier theology, but shame, after all, has power too. Let's paint the picture a little more. It's June, and the planting season is short. The clouds have been stingy for weeks, the soil cracks when you step on it, and your hands are blistered from hope. Then finally, a rain comes, but it's Sunday. Now what? Do you let the rain soak into unprepared ground and hope God remembers your restraint? Or do you throw seed with one hand and whisper a psalm with the other? That's the weight farmers carried, not just hunger, not just survival, but the moral calculus of whether obedience was worth a wasted harvest. Some families found loopholes. They'd prepare the soil Saturday evening so that Sunday's rain wasn't wasted. They wouldn't plant, but they might place the seed nearby, not labor. Just strategy. Others insisted that any involvement in Sunday soil work was defiance. They left their crops to chance, their bellies to hope, and their hearts to the wind. One fringe practice came from western Pennsylvania. Farmers would plant up to the edge of the Sabbath, literally marking their rows on Saturday night, then walking the line after church to see if the Lord had watered them. If he had, they rejoiced. If not, they fasted the next day, not out of protest, but penance. Now, that's commitment. You stand in that imaginary field and think, could you have done it? Could you have resisted the pull of urgent weather, of hungry mouths and dry ground, just to honor a boundary drawn not in dirt but in faith? And even more, could you have endured the judgment of your neighbor's stare if you crossed it? Because judgment was part of the rain, too. Not just divine, social. If your corn thrived after Sunday labor, no one clapped. They watched, waited, and when your cow miscarried 3 months later, You better believe the old woman with the prayer shawl said, "Well, we all knew something would come of it." In these communities, the spiritual and seasonal calendars were synchronized. If the fields needed rest, so did your soul, and if you dishonored one, the other might collapse too. Let's take a quick look at a slightly weirder anecdote in a small North Carolina parish. One pastor kept a ledger of Sunday violators, men and women seen hoeing, sweeping, or hammering on the Lord's Day, whenever it rained during his sermon. He'd pause and read the last 3 names aloud, just in case the rain was speaking to them. Most stopped their Sunday chores after one mention. The rest, they moved to towns over, of course. Rain didn't always equal wrath. Sometimes it was read as mercy, a kind of gentle nudge from above to pause, reflect, stay inside. It was the farmers who had pushed past mercy, past warning, who feared the rain most. You start to notice how much meaning people squeezed out of the sky. Drizzles became warnings, downpours became prophecy. And clear skies on a Sunday. That was the Lord saying, "You did well, now rest." There's something profoundly human in this need to interpret the uncontrollable through the lens of our own behavior. Maybe we still do it. Just in other ways. You remember the stories passed down like heirlooms of grandfathers who refused to carry water on Sundays, of grandmothers who covered the garden rows with linen so the rain wouldn't bless disobedience, of children who watched the weather with more reverence than the preacher, and in all of it, the land, the dirt beneath your feet, was never just earth. It was a mirror, a mouthpiece, a reminder to wait, to trust. To believe that maybe, just maybe, Monday could be a better day to plant. You're sitting in a hand-hewn pew, spine straighter than it wants to be, hymnal open but not moving your lips. The rain taps gently on the roof above, just enough to be heard but not enough to distract the preacher. Yet every farmer in that room hears it, not with their ears, with their conscience. A woman to rose up shifts in her seat and glances toward the window. She's not bored, she's worried. That's not a summer shower, that's a rebuke. Welcome to the tension between thunder and guilt. Out here, sermons and storms dance together. One brings the word, the other brings the weight. And sometimes they arrive at the same time. The preacher says judgment, and the clouds answer with a low rumble. You've seen it happen. Just once is enough to imprint that connection for life. In the early American countryside, people didn't just fear sin. They feared being caught in it, publicly, atmospherically. And rain on a Sunday wasn't just an inconvenience, it was heaven's way of saying, "I'm still watching." This wasn't just church folklore. Many sermons included direct references to weather as a moral tool. Mainstream preachers like Jonathan Edwards, famous for his sinners in the hands of an angry God, warned congregations that nature itself was part of divine communication. He didn't mention drizzle, parousia, but his thunder-heavy metaphors left a deep impression, and so the idea settled into rural life like seeds in wet soil. Even fringe groups leaned in. A small revivalist sect in Vermont taught that thunder on a Sunday indicated that angels were in combat overhead. Each clap, said their leader, is a sword striking for the soul of the valley. It sounds fantastical now, but to the families huddled under leaking roofs, it was real, palpable, personal. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were rooted in doctrine or just reinforced by coincidence. After all, it does storm on Sundays sometimes. But when your life is ruled by rhythm and rain, when something happens matters as much as why. You stare out the window. The clouds are darker now. You know the feeling, that low ache of uncertainty. The guilt you carry because you almost tied that sack of feed this morning. The whisper in your ear saying, one small act won't hurt, but now, with rain coming, you wonder. That's the spiritual paranoia of rural righteousness. One careless act becomes a question mark. One tool left out becomes a target. Not from God, necessarily, but from the community, who is always watching for moral leaks in the dam. And this fear wasn't confined to work. Imagine trying to enjoy a Sabbath meal as rain starts to fall and remembering you didn't ask forgiveness for your short temper with your son that morning. Now the peas taste different. The bread sits heavier. You don't say anything, but you pray harder. The weather becomes a mirror for the soul and rain. That's the terror of heaven either mourning you or warning you. The debate continues. There was a town in Ohio, late 1830s, where the pastor reportedly preached an entire sermon without notes every time it rained. Why? Because he believed the Lord's voice was already speaking. One week, it rained 3 Sundays in a row. He preached with such fire the rafters wept condensation, or maybe it was just humidity. Either way, the people listened, and for weeks after, you could have heard a pin drop from the plow handles. No one dared test the pattern. Even the children internalized the theology. One diary entry from a young girl in Kentucky reads, "It rained during the preacher's prayer, so I folded my hands tighter. I think maybe I caused the storms. That kind of guilt follows you, even in sleep, and let's not forget the sound of rain." When you live close to the land with no insulation, no white noise machines, and no distraction beyond your own thoughts, even a soft patter becomes a sermon. Tap, 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 each drop feels like it's saying your name. You remember one Sunday where the rain started right as the congregation sang the line, "Let not conscience make you linger." The moment stuck with you. You stopped singing. Not because you didn't believe, but because you did. Thunder. That's dramatic, but guilt comes in drops. Sometimes your neighbor would say, "That storm last night, that was the Lord passing over." You weren't sure if he meant it literally, but either way, you didn't sleep. And this brings us to the real tension. You want rain, the fields need it. Your family needs it, but when it comes at the wrong time, say, halfway through a Sunday sermon, it twists inside you like a knot in the hose. The very thing that brings life can feel like a warning. And so you pray, not just for crops, not just for mercy, but for clarity. For a break in the storm, literal or otherwise. For peace that doesn't come with wet windows, because in this world, every sound is sacred, every season a signal. And every Sunday a test, your fingers drum quietly on your knee. Not a hymn beat, a counting rhythm. You're not impatient, you're waiting. Waiting to see if the rain stops before the preacher says amen, because if it does, that's grace, and if it doesn't, well, maybe next week you don't touch the shovel at all. The tent flaps are tied back, the benches are wet, but no one cares. The revival's not canceled, heavens no, just adjusted. You're sitting near the back, hat in your lap. And there's a hush falling heavier than the rain. This isn't just church. This is survival in motion, spirit and soil. The preacher's boots are muddy. His voice rises with the wind. And everyone, farmers, field hands, midwives, barefoot children, is trying to figure out what's louder, the thunder or the conviction. Welcome to the world of rain and revival fires. Out in early American settlements, revivals weren't occasional events, they were everything. They gave meaning to suffering, rhythm to seasons, and structure to hope, and in many towns, especially on the frontier, a revival was as likely to be held in a clearing or a borrowed barn as it was in a chapel. But when those tents flapped and the clouds rolled in on a Sunday, it wasn't just a scheduling issue, it was a test. Was the Lord affirming the fervor, cleansing hearts? Or was he asking the faithful to wait? You've seen it. That moment when the preacher's voice is swallowed by a sudden downpour and no one knows whether to keep singing or start praying for the roof. Some call it distraction. Others call it spiritual theater, but for you, it always felt personal. Like God showed up in the back row and was clearing his throat, historically. The connection between rural faith and weather wasn't metaphor, it was function. Good rain meant crops meant survival. But when the rain came, determined whether that survival came with guilt or gratitude. One mainstream Methodist preacher in Tennessee once said, "The Lord sends rain to soften the soil. And sometimes to test the soul, that line ended up stitched into quilts, carved into fences, and whispered by parents to their children as they rushed to bring in laundry ahead of a storm. But not all storms were created equal if a revival was scheduled and rain came early. People fasted the next week if it came mid-sermon. That was passion made manifest. If it waited until the altar call, that was confirmation hearts cracked open like thunderheads. Fringe groups took it further, in parts of upstate New York. A brief movement known as the Cloud Feathers held worship only when skies turned gray, believing that blessings moved faster through water-soaked air. Historians still argue whether they truly believed in atmospheric grace or just preferred the cover of poor weather to cry during worship. You can't make this up. Rain was also used to explain the lack of revival. If the tents stayed empty, people blamed the weather. But not just bad luck whether they blamed someone's hidden sin for causing the rain. She let bitterness in her heart, they'd say, and now the storm won't leave. He works on the Sabbath, you think God's gonna bless that gathering. And so revival became not just an event, but a spiritual tug of war with the sky. People prayed not only for presence, but for clear skies at the right moment and rain, later, to wash it all down. There's something oddly poetic about a congregation praying under canvas for rain to come, but not now, later, on Monday. When the crops need it, not the clotheslines, when the seed's in the ground, not still in the barn. They weren't ungrateful, they were just scheduled. And when the sky respected that schedule, people remembered, they carved it into pews, journaled about it, named babies after the preacher who held the mic during the thunder. There's a story, half fact, half legend, from Indiana, 1847. A preacher named Josiah Fry held a 6-night revival during a drought. On the final night, he prayed for a soaking, Sunday-worthy blessing as he closed. The next morning, it rained all day. Quiet, steady, nourishing rain. His sermon notes were ruined, but the town never forgot it. They called it the almond storm. For years, folks said he must have been right with the Lord, he scheduled heaven. You smile now, but you know that feeling. When something lines up so perfectly, you want to believe someone up there is listening with a calendar in hand. But of course, it didn't always work that way. Sometimes the tents flooded. The songs were cut short, babies cried through the benediction, and people trailed home soaked and disappointed. Still, they didn't cancel, they just adapted. Because out there, when you're as close to the land as you are to the Lord, you don't need dry pews to catch fire. You remember standing under a revival tent once, younger than you are now, and watching a woman cry so hard the rain looked like it came from her eyes. No one said a word. The preacher just raised his voice and said, "The ground needs this, so does the heart." And you believed him. Even now, you can still feel that moment. The way your shirt stuck to your back, the smell of wet sawdust and hymnals. The knowledge that revival wasn't always comfort, it was surrender. You didn't get to choose the setting, you just had to show up and let heaven handle the atmosphere. That's the tension of revival rain. It's not about punishment. It's about presence. It reminds you that you're not in charge, that the same God who sends fire on Elijah's altar can also send mist on your tent. And both might be answers. You close your eyes, letting that thought linger like a benediction. Rain doesn't ruin the revival. Sometimes it's the revival. The sign is nailed crooked to the edge of the general store, by order, no field work, no sales, no loud tools on Sunday. You pass by it like always, but this time you look a little longer. Not because it's new, it's been there since before you could read. But today, the sky's shifting, and there's a weight in the air that makes you wonder if maybe, just maybe, that sign means more than a town rule. Maybe it's a shield. Maybe it's a warning. This is the quiet power of blue laws. You hear them mentioned sometimes in sermons or muttered when someone gets fined for chopping wood after church. They're not just traditions, they're laws, written and enforced to protect the Sabbath. To keep Sunday holy, yes, but also to remind people that rest wasn't optional. It was structured. baked into the town's very identity. And here's the twist: most folks didn't mind, at least not out loud, because these laws gave them something 2.2 when temptation knocked. Oh, I'd fix that fence today. But the law says I can't. I know the sky's just right for planting, but you know Ordinance 41. Blue laws gave people permission to rest, to stop, to sit in the uncertainty of Sunday weather without guilt. Because it wasn't just them deciding, it was the town. And when everyone stops, you don't feel behind, you feel part of something. Now historically, blue laws trace back to colonial America, especially in Puritan settlements like Connecticut and Massachusetts. They dictated everything from which goods could be sold on Sunday, to which activities counted as unnecessary labor, and yes, rain on a Sunday had its own unspoken clause. If it rained and you were caught working, the fine doubled, because it meant you not only broke the law, you ignored the sign. There's a famous case from 1779 in New Jersey where a man was brought before the town council for mending a barrel during the Lord's downpour. His defense: I thought the rain was for the barrel, not against the day. He lost, paid in potatoes. Fringe detail. Some counties added sound restrictions: no hammering, no chopping, and definitely no music that made you want to dance. Unless it was a hymn, and even then, only if the rain didn't make it sound too joyful. Historians still argue whether blue laws truly reflected religious conviction or were simply tools for controlling communal rhythm. But either way, they became part of the weather themselves: quiet, constant, and hard to ignore, and in farming towns, the law was often the only thing strong enough to keep the plow in the barn. Because when the soil is ready and the sky is weeping, it takes more than faith to resist it. Takes a neighbor with a badge and a clipboard. You've probably seen the way people walk slower on Sundays. They open doors with gentler hands. Even the dogs seem to bark a little less. That's the law doing its work, not through fear, but through atmosphere. And rain tested the law's reach. If it poured and you stayed inside, the town nodded in silent approval. If it drizzled and you slipped out to check your fence and someone saw you, well, expect a visit Monday. But here's what no one tells you. The blue laws didn't just restrict, they revealed. They showed who could sit still, who trusted that 6 days of labor could carry 7, who believed that obedience didn't stop when the sky started crying. You remember one older man, Mr. Calhoun, who kept a rocking chair just outside his barn. He'd sit there every Sunday during storms, eyes on the field, hands folded in his lap like he was daring someone to tempt him. One time, a neighbor asked if he'd help fix a fence. He shook his head and said, "The Lord gave me this rest, and the law makes sure I use it." Then he went right back to rocking. It wasn't laziness, it was reverence with a little legal backup. And there's something almost comforting in that structure. Because when the laws say stop, and the sky says not today, and your preacher says wait, you're not alone. You're part of a woven fabric, stitched together by obedience and a shared fear of thunder. Not everyone agreed. Of course, there were always a few who thought blue laws were too stiff, too old-fashioned. God helps those who help themselves, they'd mutter as they picked tomatoes under gray clouds. But even they flinched when the first drop hit their boots, because what if? What if that law was more than a town rule? What if it was a line drawn between dry harvest and drowned pride? And even now, in places where those laws have faded, the memory lingers. A kind of ghost code in the way people lower their voices during Sunday storms. The way shops close early just in case. The way your hand hesitates over the rake when the sky's too quiet. You know that hesitation. It's not fear. Not really. It's memory. And so, the laws stay even when unwritten, even when unenforced. Because sometimes tradition holds firmer than ink, and rest enforced by history is still rest, even if the ticket never comes. So, the next time you hear rain on a Sunday and feel that odd pull toward the barn, remember, someone wrote it down once. Someone passed it into policy, into rhythm, into you. And you don't have to pick up the hoe, not today. It starts with a cough. Not yours, someone else's, out on the lane near the well, maybe. Just loud enough to make you glance up from your Bible. You shift in your seat, the Sunday paper half folded beside you. It's raining again, light and steady, not a storm but a soaking drizzle. And suddenly, you know what time it is. Neighbors will start watching the sky together. Not because they're bored, not because there's nothing else to do, but because shared silence under a cloudy sky is one of the oldest forms of rural communication. You don't need to say much, you just need to look up, look around, and know that everyone else is thinking the same thing. What does this rain mean? You step out onto the porch, cup of coffee warming your hand. Down the road, you see your neighbor, Mrs. Blevins, hanging onto her shawl with one hand, shielding her eyes with the other. She looks at the clouds the way some folks look at an X-ray searching for news, not just water ... in early American towns. People didn't just react to whether they interpreted it. Rain wasn't just wet, it was informative, a commentary, a sermon, a sign. Especially when it landed on the Sabbath, and if you worked the land. You didn't just track the weather, you built your schedule, your gossip, your faith around it. The Sunday sky became a kind of rural scripture. People read it like they read faces. Clouds could smile, frown, or furrow. There was even a kind of sky language. A shared vocabulary of glances and nods. Gray but dry, a cautious blessing, spitting rain before noon, someone's working when they shouldn't be. Sudden downpour after the last hymn, God's punctuation. And you weren't the only one decoding it. Folk wisdom passed through generations like yeast in a kitchen. If it rains while you rest, the Lord is pleased. Or, if the rooster crows in the rain, the preacher's not finished yet. Or, even darker, Sunday clouds born from sweat bring lightning by July. Some of it sounds silly now, but out there when your whole life depended on weather behaving, you clung to any pattern that made sense. One historical journal from Illinois tells of entire communities gathering after Sunday service to stand and face the sky for 5 minutes in silence, just in case the Lord wanted to speak through the clouds. We turned west, it says, because that's where the weather and the Savior returned from. Historians still argue whether this ritual was religious, social, or both. But there's no doubt it happened. In small towns and big fields, the sky was everyone's first teacher. Rain wasn't personal, but it felt personal, especially when it hit on a day meant for rest. And when neighbors saw each other looking up, that was enough. You didn't need to talk about it. You already knew what was being said. Still, some did talk. You remember the old men who sat outside the mill, spitting into cans and saying things like, "That's judgment rain. Look how it soaks quick. That's not just water, it's a lesson." And the others would nod, not because they agreed, but because they didn't dare disagree out loud. Not when the air was heavy with something they couldn't name, and when gossip did start, it moved fast. A single farmer caught walking to the tool shed during a light drizzle could become the center of town speculation by supper. I saw him, someone would say, boots muddy before communion. Probably just checking the fence, another might offer. "Fence doesn't break on the Lord's time," came the reply. Rain, you see, was a moral trigger. It activated curiosity, judgment, compassion. Too, but that came later, if at all. One fringe tradition in Appalachian communities involved putting a single leaf in a bowl of rainwater after church. If the leaf floated upright, it meant the faithful were still upright. If it flipped, folks went quiet. No one would say it aloud, but they'd look at each other just a little differently that week. And the kids, they learned early, you don't stomp in Sunday puddles. You don't talk loud during drizzle, and you definitely don't say the rain is fun. That's how you catch the preacher's side eye for the rest of the service. Even the animals played along. Chickens didn't squawk on Sundays, or so people said, and if they did, someone in the room had likely sinned before breakfast. You smile thinking about it now. How the community was its own weather pattern, clouds of belief, wind of rumor, and always that heavy pressure of shared expectation. And through it all, the sky, watching, dripping, whispering. You remember standing beside your father once, both of you wordless, staring out at the field while rain tapped on the brim of his hat. He didn't say anything profound. Just spat, adjusted his belt, and said, "That ain't regular rain, that's the kind that lingers." You didn't know what he meant, not fully, but you knew enough to nod. Because that was the real power of Sunday rain. It didn't just wet the crops, it soaked into the stories, into the glances passed between porches, into the understanding that sometimes you don't work. You don't explain, you just look up and listen. And in those quiet, shared moments, with the clouds pressing low and the windows open just a crack, you realize something. You don't fear the rain, you revere it. Because whether it's mercy, warning, or simply nature, it reminds you that you're not the only one watching the sky. The first drop hits your shoulder just after the benediction. It's not dramatic, no thunderclap, no flash of light. Just a single bead of water soaking slowly into the fabric of your Sunday shirt, but you notice it. Everyone notices it. Because it's not supposed to rain now. Not during dismissal, not when folks are heading out with their hymn books and handshakes, and certainly not when the potluck table is already covered in pies. You glance up, the clouds are rolling in, slow but sure. You hear murmurs, you hear one man chuckle under his breath, "Well, someone didn't pray hard enough." Another says nothing, just clutches his Bible tighter and walks a little faster toward his wagon. This is the mood you know well. Damp socks, damper spirits. When you live close to the land, and even closer to tradition, a rainy Sunday doesn't just affect the fields, it affects the people. The mood, the tone of the town, the sound of boots squishing down the chapel steps might as well be a sigh from heaven. Even when the sermon is solid and the choir's in tune, all it takes is one good drizzle to unravel everyone's peace. Suddenly, the jokes get quieter, the laughter feels a little forced. And more than one person starts wondering, what did I do this week? Because out here, weather is spiritual feedback. It's not that rain is inherently bad. It's essential. It's prayed for. But when it lands at the wrong moment on the Lord's Day, during the 1 hour when you're supposed to feel uplifted, it can hit differently. Like a whispered reminder that someone, somewhere, missed the mark. Mainstream churchgoers sometimes called this Sabbath sorrow. It wasn't doctrine. It wasn't written in stone. But people felt it all the same, especially when it came in softly. Rain that sneaks into your Sunday right as you're slicing pie or setting out folding chairs has a way of pressing on nerves you didn't know were exposed, and that feeling, it travels, from the picnic table to the pulpit to the porch. Suddenly, Sister Ruth is quieter than usual. Brother Clarence doesn't refill the coffee urn. The children are told not to run in the mud, even though that's all they want to do. One fringe belief recorded in a Kansas farming town around 1880 held that if it rained only during post-church gatherings, it meant a member of the flock had been dishonest in prayer. No one would say who. No one had to. They just looked around during the first drop and waited for someone to fidget. Historians still argue whether this kind of superstition was meant to control behavior or soothe confusion, but either way, it worked. People double-checked their tithes, rewound their words, reviewed the week in their heads like a silent confessional, and the preacher, he felt it too. You've seen them standing under a canopy of clouds, hat in hand, sermon still echoing in their chest, wondering if the message fell flat, wondering if they missed something, or worse, if someone in the pews misheard it. Because rain on a Sunday wasn't just atmospheric, it was emotional weather. It changed the temperature of fellowship. Suddenly, conversations got shorter, hugs got tighter. People packed up faster, not just to beat the rain, but to outrun the mood it brought. There's a line in an old letter from a Virginia pastor to his brother. Today the rain began during the invitation hymn. No one came forward. I blame the clouds, but I fear it was me. That's the quiet weight of wet Sundays. Not tragedy, not judgment, just a grayness that sneaks into the soul and settles like mist on the windows. You remember it well. The smell of damp wood, the sound of paper plates curling at the edges, the slick steps behind the steeple where children used to run and now just walk carefully, holding hands. The little things that shift when the weather isn't quite right. And yet, even here, especially here, there's meaning. You learn to read the rain not as punishment, but as pause. Not every drizzle is a message. Not every gray sky is a rebuke. Sometimes it's just a reminder, a holy hush, an invitation to slow down, linger longer, and carry the word out into a world that's a little softer than it was 10 minutes ago. You've seen the change, the way people drive home quieter, the way porches stay full longer, the way someone starts humming that oldham just loud enough for you to catch a word or two through the rain. Even soggy Sundays have their blessings, but still no one likes wet socks. And you'll hear about it. Every potluck, every service, every ride home. It's a minor misery, but a communal one. Which means it bonds you in ways sunshine never does. There's comfort in the shared inconvenience, the knowing glances, the laughter about ruined hair and slipping shoes, the inside joke that God timed it just right to make sure we stayed humble, so you sit a little longer in the sanctuary, letting the last hymn echo while the rain settles in. You're not in a rush. The fellowship hall is already half-packed. The sky isn't letting up. And maybe that's okay, because when the weather turns and the people sigh and the socks squish, it might just be the Lord telling everyone, don't hurry this moment, let it sink in. You stand with one foot on the porch step and one still inside the house, torn between the sensible desire to fetch that hoe you left leaning by the fence and the subtle, creeping awareness that it's Sunday and worse, it's raining, not storming. Just the kind of steady, gray drizzle that feels like it's watching you, judging your choices. You glance across the yard and see it glinting your tool, your task. And then you glance at the road, someone might see. This is the tension between hymns, hoes, and hypocrisy. In every small town you've known, there's a line defined to be seen and too important to be crossed. On one side, devotion, rest, the peace of Sabbath. On the other, duty, upkeep, the never-ending to-do list of a farmer or homesteader. And caught in the middle, you and your muddy conscience. Because let's be honest, that fence post didn't fix itself Saturday, and you didn't think the clouds would come this fast. But if you walk out there now with that tool in hand and a hymn still echoing in your ear, someone's going to talk. Maybe not today, maybe not to your face, but someone will remember. Early American communities didn't just value rest, they measured it. Watched it, enforced it with stares more piercing than any sheriff's badge. Not going to church was one thing. Working during church, that was social self-sabotage. And not because they didn't understand necessity. Of course they did. Cows don't care about blue laws. Babies are born on the Lord's Day, too, but it was about the spirit behind the action. Were you fixing the chicken coop to save the flock, or because you didn't plan ahead? One mainstream anecdote from a town in Georgia tells of a man who was seen oiling a gate hinge during a Sunday drizzle. Quiet task, no noise, no mess, but people talked about it for years. Started with hinges, they'd whisper, next thing you know, he'll be re-roofing the church on Easter. And the weight of that whisper wasn't just judgment, it was expectation that on Sunday, especially a wet one, your priorities should be clear. And if they weren't, well, perhaps your faith wasn't either. That's where the hypocrisy crept in, not in the work, but in the pretense of not working. You remember seeing a neighbor one Sunday, standing behind his barn half-hidden shelling peas into a bucket. When you made eye contact, he smiled sheepishly and said, just making sure the Lord gets them fresh tomorrow. Was it a joke? Was it a justification? Both. Because sometimes the act wasn't the sin, it was the hiding, the pretending to rest while your fingers still moved behind closed doors. And that hypocrisy, tiny though it was, clashed against the sound of him still trailing out from the chapel down the road. There's an old saying, the shovel used after church echoes louder than the bell before it. People knew, people noticed, and in many communities, the next time it rained on a Sunday, more than a few glances in your direction. And that judgment, it didn't always come from malice. Sometimes it came from fear, because your small act of disobedience, harmless as it seemed, threatened them. Their blessings, their crops, their rain schedule. In a world ruled by weather and worrying, even one out-of-sync soul could feel like a crack in the dam. Still, not everyone followed the same playbook. There were always a few who balanced it better, who sang the loudest in church, but still slipped out to cover hay bales when the clouds rolled in. And somehow, they escaped the gossip. Why? Maybe it was charm. Maybe it was a perfectly timed pie donation. Or maybe they simply did what most didn't dare. They owned it. I pulled weeds on the Lord's Day, one woman once said, wiping mud from her skirt. And I thanked him for the rain while I did it. No excuses, no shame, just clarity. Fringe communities often embraced this paradox more openly. In a Quaker-led farming town in upstate New York, it was believed that any work done in silence and with a prayerful heart was a form of worship. So long as your hands moved in stillness and your lips whispered psalms, the Lord wouldn't mind a hoe in your hand. Historians still argue whether this was spiritual innovation or convenient theology. But for many, it offered peace, a way to serve both the Lord and the lettuce. And maybe there's a lesson in that. Because as you stand on your porch, drizzle dancing on the wind, hymn in your head, tooling your line of sight, you have a choice. Do you rest because you must? Or do you rest because you trust? There's no right answer. Not one the preacher can give. Not one the neighbors can enforce, just a quiet, personal moment between you and the sky. You step back inside, the hoe will wait, because maybe the best thing you can do today is nothing at all. It's Sunday morning and the sanctuary is quiet, save for the low rustle of hymnals and the sound of rain tapping a slow rhythm on the chapel roof. You take your seat near the back habit, not humility, and glance over at the pulpit. There's Pastor Green, same dark coat, same gentle way of clearing his throat before speaking. But today, something's different. He's gripping the pulpit a little tighter, glancing up at the ceiling a little more often. And you realize you're not the only one thinking about the weather, because this morning, Pastor Green is caught in what every country preacher secretly dreads, the rainmaker dilemma. You've probably never said it out loud, but you've thought it, maybe even prayed it. Lord, we need rain, but not today. It's not greed, it's logistics. You want a full church, a dry service, and a sky that listens to your calendar. But sometimes it rains, and when it does, the preacher gets pulled into directions faith and forecast. Should he thank God for the blessing? Or apologize to the congregation for the mud in their boots and the empty rows in the back? Preachers were often seen as spiritual barometers, especially in early America. If it rained after a revival, folks said the heavens approve. If it poured during a funeral, they whispered, the soul is safely received. But if it stormed during communion, or worse, during a half-finished sermon, some folks squinted a little harder at the man behind the pulpit. After all, wasn't he supposed to be the one closest to God? One historical letter from an 1850 to Alabama preacher laments, the rain fell before I could close the word. And I fear the Lord found my message lacking. That kind of weight could sit on a man's shoulders for months. Even fringe denominations weren't immune to this expectation. In a small Kentucky holiness sect, congregants would measure the truthfulness of a sermon by whether or not it stopped the rain. A dry dismissal meant the preacher had spoken pure. A thunderclap during closing prayer, time for fasting. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were born from theology or anxiety. But for pastors, it didn't matter. They felt it either way. You recall one Sunday not long ago, the service had barely begun when a crack of thunder split the air like a warning. Everyone jumped, some flinched, and the pastor, he paused, looked up. and with a half-smile said, "Well, either we're right on time or late by a mile." The room laughed, but not too loud, because out here, the man who prays for rain must also pray that it falls politely. After the sermon, after the pie, preferably overnight. That's the paradox. The preacher must call down rain, but hope it doesn't land on his service. You've seen him navigate it. The careful phrasing, "Lord, bless the crops this week." The subtle clauses, "Send us what we need in your timing, according to your will," which, let's be honest, is a holy way of saying, "Please wait until Monday." And the tension shows, especially during planting season, when every farmer is watching the skies more closely than the pulpit. If the preacher prays too hard and it rains too much, he's blamed. If he doesn't pray at all and the fields go dry, he's blamed. If he says nothing and it rains anyway, people say, well, maybe someone else's prayers got through. It's a tightrope, and every Sunday, he walks it in full view of a congregation holding hymnals in one hand and seed catalogs in the other. One local tale tells of a preacher who tried to avoid the rain talk entirely, never mentioned it, focused only on salvation, scripture, and song. But after 3 weeks of silence and 3 consecutive wet Sundays, a woman stood up mid-service and said, "Well, if you're not going to ask him to stop, I will." She marched to the front, said a single prayer, and the sun broke through 10 minutes later. Coincidence? Probably, but no one ever forgot it. And that preacher never skipped a weather mention again. There's something almost comical about it, the way rain ties heaven and earth, faith and forecast in a single gray ribbon. The preacher becomes not just a spiritual leader, but a meteorological ambassador. If he's sweating, the congregation starts whispering. If he looks calm during a storm, people breathe easier. You think of Pastor Green again, still preaching under a slow, steady drizzle. His voice hasn't faltered, but you know he's doing mental math. How long until it gets heavier? How many verses until I can wrap this up? Will they forgive me if the road home floods, and yet he doesn't stop? Because maybe the sermon matters more because it's raining. Maybe the very act of standing there, speaking truth while the sky shouts back, is the point. You begin to realize something deeper. The preacher isn't in charge of the weather. He's not trying to control it. He's standing in it, with you. And that's what makes the difference. Not whether he summoned the sun or held back the storm, but whether he kept preaching when the roof leaked and the people stayed. Because the real measure of faith isn't what comes after the rain. It's what you do during it. You wake Monday morning to sun breaking clean and warm across the dew-laced fields. It's quiet not in the empty way, but in the kind of hush that follows reverence. The kind that arrives after something important has passed and left its mark. Yesterday it rained ... not a storm, not a flood, just a soft, steady Sabbath rain that soaked shoes and hymn books and thoughts. You sit with a cup of something hot, watching the steam rise like breath, and for a moment you feel something settle inside you. Faith that waited for Monday. It's a strange kind of faith, not flashy, not loud. It doesn't part seas or call fire from heaven. It doesn't make headlines or testimonies. It simply holds still when everything in you says move. It puts the hoe down. It closes the barn door. It watches the clouds and says, "Not yet." This is the faith your grandfather had, when he let the corn go one more day untouched just because it was Sunday. The same faith your mother had when she told you, "Leave the laundry on the line. If it rains, not laziness, not stubbornness, just trust." In early American communities, this kind of patience was more than personal, it was communal. You weren't just waiting alone. The entire town paused. The rhythm slowed. Even the livestock, it seemed, respected the day. And the payoff, Monday, the sun coming out? The soil softened just enough, the fences still standing, the crops still green, and that subtle, satisfying confirmation in your chest that maybe, just maybe, waiting was worth it. You see, for these people, Monday's sun meant more than just good weather. It was a kind of nod from above. Not just that rest was honored, but that the rest worked. That trust, in all its stillness, had been enough, and yes, there were the skeptics. There were always a few who plowed on Sunday and still got a fine harvest. A few who fixed their gutters while the clouds broke and had no ill consequences, but they didn't feel the same. They didn't walk around Monday morning with the same sense of settled peace. Because what you gain from obedience isn't just results, it's relief. You remember a journal entry from a New Hampshire farmer in 1804 who wrote, "Waded through the rain. Did not touch the field, feared the blight. But today the sun rises strong, and I feel right with the land, no miracle, no reward." Just that quiet inner click of alignment, and sometimes that's all you need. Fringe communities, like certain Anabaptist sects, believed Monday was the proof day, that if you honored the Sabbath fully even in whether you'd see favor within 24 hours. Historians still argue whether this was theology or tradition, but either way, it encouraged discipline. You sip your coffee and glance at the tools lined up by the shed. Today, they're ready. Today, the ground welcomes your hand. You worked with the rhythm, not against it. You didn't force the season. You didn't wrestle the sky, and maybe that's the point. In a world full of people trying to push their way forward through rain, through rest, through reason you're quiet, stubborn trust becomes something sacred. A different kind of faith. A farmer once said, anyone can plow. But it takes discipline to not plow when the rows are screaming for it. He wasn't wrong. And you've learned that lesson in more ways than one, not just in fields, but in life. In conversations you could have started, but didn't. In battles you could have fought, but walked away from. In the gentle restraint that comes not from weakness, but wisdom, because sometimes waiting is the strongest move you can make. And the Sabbath isn't just a rule, it's an invitation to step back, to breathe. To remember that the world doesn't fall apart when you rest, it heals. So now, as the Monday sun stretches across your porch, you feel it again, not pride, not righteousness. Just peace, the kind of peace that comes from obedience without applause. From faith that didn't need to prove anything. From knowing you let the rain fall and didn't force the seed, you trusted the pattern. And it met you with light. The storm has passed. The windows have dried, the boots are resting in the corner, and the sky outside is clear. Your breath slows, not because you're tired, but because your spirit is full. There's a kind of calm that comes only when you've waited well. When you've honored the moment without rushing through it. And now that calm wraps around you like a soft quilt, not flashy. Not dramatic, just present. You hear the faint echo of a hymn in your memory. Maybe from yesterday, maybe from long ago. The kind sung slowly, with no hurry to reach the final note. And that's how your body feels now, like the final chord of a song that lingered just long enough. You're not hurried. You're not guilty. You're not wondering if you did enough. You waited. And now you rest inside the reward of that waiting. The rain did not rebuke you. The clouds did not accuse you. They passed, as they always do, and in their wake. They left behind space to work, to breathe, to begin again. Let that stillness stay with you. Carry it through your Monday, through your chores, through the moments when you're tempted to force what should unfold naturally. You don't need to chase the rhythm. You already belong to it. Let it carry you now. Good night.